Okay, folks, it is time for part 3 of my Lunchbox Soapbox, an unpopular sports opinion. I've been looking at Kobe Bryant, so when I say part 3, I mean part 3 of my Kobe Bryant series. There will be more Lunchbox Soapbox, I'm sure of it. But I think this is probably the most important of the 3 videos in terms of actually looking at Kobe Bryant's legacy. All the other ones I've done so far were really just giving you background information, setting the stage, showing what the agenda was, how this was all being implemented at an early stage. But of course, after all that's said and done, the obvious criticism or whatever, counter voice would be, well, okay, that's fine. So, there was all these players involved. There was, the shoe companies. There was this guy, Sonny Vaccaro. There's the NBA as a whole, all working to kind of set the stage for Kobe Bryant to be successful. But at the end of the day, the guy had to go out there and perform. So kudos to him for actually fulfilling their expectations, right? That's sort of the counter, maybe the counter story. Well, unfortunately, not exactly. In order to really understand this, we have to dig into some other things, most notably statistics, because statistics don't lie. So I want to start by looking at some statistical data, and then I'm going to bring up a couple other points that are also interesting and troubling as well. So let's begin with the statistics, and let's actually not just look at Kobe Bryant, let's look at some other players throughout NBA history to kind of give us a gauge of where Bryant actually falls in these categories. But where I want to begin is a statistic that I think is really important that a lot of people don't know, and that is Kobe Bryant is actually number 1 in one statistical category in NBA statistical history. And a lot of people don't know what that is, and it's actually missed shots. That's right, Kobe Bryant has more missed shots than any player in the history of the NBA. I want to show you the slide of where he falls, and then we're going to talk about it, so hang on. Okay, here you can see the list of most missed shots. Kobe Bryant at the top with 14,481 missed shots. Okay, after looking at this slide, you can see it's confirmed. Kobe Bryant has the most missed shots. But what's so interesting is the number by which he leads that category. He's essentially 1,000 more missed shots than any other player in the history of the game. It goes down to like 13,000, 300 something, then like 12,000, these categories. So it's a large margin of missed shots, far larger than any other player in the history of the game. That in of itself should be troubling, okay? So just a couple points on that. First and foremost, if you look at the list, you can see it's a long list of great players, some of the greatest scorers of the game. So this actually makes sense. If you're a person who's known as being a dominant scorer, you're inevitably going to be a person who shoots more. And if you're a person who has a long, healthy career, you're going to even have that many more total shots taken. So it would make sense that great scorers would also have, by default, lots of missed shots, like Kobe Bryant. But again, this is where comparing and contrasting is important. Kobe Bryant has like 1,000 more than most people. So just to give you a gauge of how many shots that is, a standard NBA season is 82 games. So if you took 12 shots per game in an entire NBA season and you missed every single shot you took, that comes out to 986 shots. That's the range at which Kobe Bryant is ahead of every other player in missed shots. But that's not all. You got to go further than that. Because again, he could have a lot of missed shots, but if he was making the shots as often as he's missing them, well, that's not too problematic, because that just means he just happened to shoot more than any other player in the history of the game. But if he's making them, good for him. So this is when we have to look at, well, how many shots did he make? I.e., what's his actual career field goal percentage? Now, just to be fair, let's look at some other players. I want to see kind of where we can get a range of different players. So I've picked 3 players who were great players, Hall of Fame caliber, superstars. I picked guys from the original Dream Team because that was an easy place to pull from. But I didn't want to pull the obvious guys like Magic Johnson or Larry Bird or Michael Jordan. I wanted to pick some guys that maybe the average person wouldn't even remember on the Dream Team, just to kind of say, well, I'm not just stacking the deck against Kobe Bryant. Let's just look at some different guys. So the 3 players I looked at are David Robinson, Chris Mullins, and John Stockton. So let me show you their stats. Okay, this is David Robinson at 51.8% career. Here's Chris Mullin at 50.9%. And then finally, here we have John Stockton at 51.5%. Again, this is over their entire career. Okay, what we can see from those slides I just showed you is that there is a bit of a common denominator in this whole mess. And that is all these guys are essentially shooting around 50%. Okay. Now, just for the record, David Robinson being a big man, you expect big man to probably be a little bit higher in field goal percentage because they're shooting closer to the basket. But Mullins and Stockton are shooting jump shots primarily as, shooting guards and point guards and things like that. And that's not as statistically likely to go in. Furthermore, in the case of Mullins and Stockton, these guys weren't known for like dunking the basketball, which is obviously the highest percentage shot. So you think of a person like Kobe Bryant, who would frequently dunk the basketball, that's going to add to his field goal percentage. But the point being is it's around 50%. I like to think of this just as a general example, and this is not perfect, but if you think of baseball and baseball statistics, there's kind of a spectrum of where a person should fall in terms of greatness as a hitter. And that number that's kind of the benchmark is usually the 300 mark. If you're a guy who has a season where you're hitting the ball 300, you're having a great season. If you're a guy who hits 300 over the course of your career, that's world class. And if you do it over 300 in the course of your career, you think of guys like Tony Gwynn or Ted Williams, Stan Musial, these guys are the elite of the elite. So it kind of gives you a spectrum. Well, in terms of basketball and field goal percentage, the 50% mark is a good indicator, right? If you're shooting 50%, you're shooting pretty well as a basketball player. Remember, in basketball, every point or every basket is worth 2 points. So it kind of evens out. So if you're a guy who's shooting it above 50%, it's great. If you're below 50%, it's on a spectrum of how great that is. And the same way, if you're hitting 300 versus, where in the spectrum you are below 300. Are you like 289? Are you like 279? Are you like 259? Are you like 249? And then that spectrum comes down, 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 down. And then that really gives you a gauge about how good a hitter is. Well, it's the same thing with field goal percentage. And that's why we need to look at Kobe Bryant's career field goal percentage. Check it out. So here we see Kobe Bryant at 44.7, under 45% from the field as a career. And if you actually look up that line all the way up to the top for every season Bryant played, his some odd 20 seasons, he actually doesn't have a single season where he shot the ball 50% or better. In fact, the highest he looks like he's at is about 47%. That's right. 44% field goal percentage shooter. Not world class. It's not abysmal, but it's not great. Then when you factor in the fact that this guy is taking more shots than anyone in the history of the game, it explains why he has more missed shots by a large margin than anyone in the history of the game. Okay? This is a pretty damning statistic. It's not great. I don't know any other way to say it. It's not a great stat. So this whole discussion about Kobe Bryant and him being a manufactured superstar came back really to Michael Jordan. I haven't really compared Bryant's stats to Jordan so far just because Jordan is obviously the sort of pinnacle of success in pro basketball. But I think it's important now to actually bring Jordan into the mix because everyone pretty well agrees that Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player of all time. And as we've learned, Kobe Bryant was intended to be a person to sort of carry on that torch and be the new face of the league. But how does he actually compare to Jordan? Well, the answer is he compares it to Jordan very, very well. But only if you look at Jordan's final season after his 2 previous retirements when he's playing with the Wizards. Check it out. Here it is, Michael Jordan's final season with the Washington Wizards, and he is a 44.5 field goal percentage shooter. Literally only 2/1000ths of a point different than Kobe Bryant throughout his career. That's right. I can't emphasize this enough because even Jordan fans joke about Michael's years with the Wizards. But when you look at these stats, it should tell you two things. One, his time with the Wizards was probably not as bad as people remember. But two, the only way you can put Kobe Bryant in the same discussion as Michael Jordan is by looking at Jordan's final year with the Wizards. Their field goal percentage is essentially identical, down to 1,000th of a point. Yeah, Kobe Bryant's career is Michael Jordan, his final season on the Wizards. Now, if this isn't all enough for you, there are some other important side notes that need to be mentioned, which we haven't even talked about, and that is hand checking. I'm going to pull up another stat for you. Hang on. So the first time the NBA ever addresses hand checking is actually in 1979, and this is in order to try to promote more offense, although it's not really widely enforced, and especially not on guards who are playing at the perimeter of the key. This, however, changes in the year of 1995. The NBA takes a concentrated effort to completely change their policy around hand checking and to actually enforce the rules to ensure that guards can have an easier time making shots or penetrating to the basket. Here's the slide right there. You can see 1995. So from those slides, you can see a couple things. The hand checking rule was initially put into play in the late 70s, but it wasn't enforced. And it really was probably more targeted to big men because that's where most of the offense was coming from. But as the game began to unfold, what the NBA really wanted was guards like Jordan scoring more points because that was better for viewing and better for fans. Fans like it when a smaller player is able to slash and dash or do a fadeaway or pull up for threes. Think of how the NBA is modeled now. And so it made for better television and it made for better scoring. So the NBA in 1995 went back and revisited the hand checking rule and made it something that was a very observable offense to the point where it was completely banned from guards outside the perimeter or up the top of the key. Essentially, you couldn't hand check. Really, you couldn't even touch them. And the whole point of this was for the reasons I just said. They wanted to promote more scoring from guards. It's important to know that Kobe Bryant's career, he played with the hand-checking rule being enforced, whereas players like Michael Jordan did not have that rule enforced, meaning it's fundamentally easier after 1995, and intentionally so, for a guard to score than it was in the previous era. When you think about that in coordination with his field goal percentages and his number of missed shots, it yet again becomes even more problematic because the NBA is actually changing the rules to make it easier for you to score. And I'm not saying they made the rule specifically for Bryant. That might get a little bit too conspiratorial, but certainly Bryant was at the forefront of that change in the sense that he was the most popular player in the position and probably benefited from it most in the sense that he's shooting the ball more than any other guard in the league. Now, if all that's not enough, there's even one more thing that has to be discussed, and this is when it does start to go a little bit further down the conspiratorial rabbit hole. So let's take a look at this. It's now time to talk about NBA ref Tim Donaghy. If you're not already familiar with the story of Tim Donaghy, you should take a little time and look into it. He has a book. I also screenshotted a great podcast called Whistleblower that you can listen to. It's worth a listen. I think he even has a documentary series that's going to be coming out. But Donaghy is the referee who was tied to gambling. And what Donaghy actually has come forward and said openly and stated is that what he was doing was not only known, it was being done by all the referees, and it was being encouraged by the NBA. That's right, Donaghy says that the NBA was telling referees which teams they wanted to win, which teams they wanted in the playoffs, and even which players they wanted to be successful. And it all came down to TV ratings. Donaghy said it was actually quite easy to manipulate these games when you have a whistle. If you want a team to win, you just take their other team's best player out early in the game due to foul trouble. Or if you want a guy to score points, you just call fouls every time he shoots. Here's an example. Kobe Bryant goes up for a shot. He shoots. He misses because what we've learned from his stats is he misses it more than he makes it. So Donahue or whomever blows a whistle and calls a foul. Well, when you look at that in coordination with the hand-checking policies, Donahue says there's always contact in every play. So you just call the ones you want. You put Kobe Bryant on the line. He gets to make some free throws. It pads his stats even further. It gives the Lakers a couple more points, and you can see how you can shape a game. It was not just play-to-play, but also just getting point spreads, which gets into a totally different part of gambling and how Vegas actually gambles on point spreads. But if Donahue is in fact telling the truth, and we have no reason to think he's lying, it becomes highly speculative in terms of which teams were really successful and why. And this is especially true when we look at the Los Angeles Lakers and, of course, Kobe Bryant. This is the team and one of the players that Donahue specifically mentions. The Lakers being the most popular franchise in the NBA, this was the team that, according to him, the NBA said they wanted in the playoffs. And Kobe Bryant, as the future face of the league and as the person who was seemingly the most popular player with fans, largely due to a hugely successful campaign we learned about through shoe contracts and guys like Sonny Vaccaro, the NBA wanted Kobe Bryant to score and to be in the playoffs and to be successful and to win championships. And it seems as though, if Donahue's telling the truth, the refs were encouraged to make this happen. So now let's take a whole look at this, and let's look at a guy who really wasn't a bad basketball player, but he's what you might call a volume shooter, someone who shoots the ball a lot in order to essentially pad his statistics. You put him on the most popular and best team in the sport. You surround him with a slew of all-stars from every generation, everything from Nick Van Exel and Eddie Jones, J.R. Ryder, Glenn Rice. The list goes on. Just amazing role players, Robert Horry, Rick Fox. And then, of course, you bring the best player in the game, Shaquille O'Neal, and you essentially have a recipe for a team that's going to succeed. You go through multiple coaches, including getting not only the coach who's the best coach in the league at that time, but the best coach in the history of the game in Phil Jackson. Then you change the rules so that there's no hand checking. You allow guards like Bryant to be able to score more. And then, potentially, you encourage refs to allow those players to be more successful than others. What you've got is a very, very good scenario for manufacturing success. Okay? And the fact that Kobe Bryant's statistics, particularly his field goal statistics, as a person who's known as being a scorer, arguably one of the greatest scorers in the game, aren't that great, this should be the clear red flag. And to me it is. Now, what's the point of all this? Am I saying Kobe Bryant wasn't good? No, of course not. He was one of the most dynamic, one of the most exciting players of his generation. I would say he was even one of the best players of his generation. But that's fundamentally different than saying he's one of the greatest of all times. Okay? In my opinion, you can't even put Kobe Bryant in the discussion. Okay? His numbers just don't make sense there. Okay? He's not a world-class player. To me, he's not only not top 5, he's not even top 20. How can he be a 44% field goal percent shooter, have the most missed shots in the history of the game, and be considered a top 20 player? You can't, in my opinion. But this just goes to show you the power of narrative and the fact that because of this marketing campaign and because you can manufacture success in certain ways, Kobe Bryant ended up being a superstar, the biggest superstar of his generation. And what's so important about this, I feel, is not just because I'm trying to attack Kobe Bryant. I have nothing against the man. I've never met him. It's because I feel like it set the stage for future generations of players and for future sports organizations where they learned that they can invest in a person for whatever reason and they can manufacture a scenario where that person finds success. And then that's that fine, weird line where you don't really know what you're watching and what you're getting. Hopefully you found this interesting. I'll be back with many more. Have a great day.